I've been all over the crochet cluster stitch ever since I found out what it is. I find it so satisfying to do and I just love the look of it. So I made a scarf because I think this really just lets the stitch shine, and I'm going to share a tutorial with you today. It's pretty beginner friendly, but it doesn't look it. I think it just looks so nice when it's done. This pattern was originally published in the Q4 2024 issue of Material Grrrlz magazine. This is a free download that I'll leave down below. You can find the written version of this pattern in there, as well as other free knitting, crochet, and sewing patterns, project recommendations, and articles. So much fiber arts fun. You'll need 2 to 3 colors of size 4 yarn to make the scarf, as well as a 3.75mm crochet hook, tapestry needle, and a pair of scissors. To know what colors are going to show up as what, this is color 2, this light pink, and then color 1 is this color here that kind of separates all the clusters from each other. Optionally, you can also use a third color if you want the border around it to be different. Start with color 1. This is going to be the color that eventually makes little dots that separate your clusters from each other. Start with a slip knot, put it on your hook, and chain 24 stitches. Once that's done, our first row is kind of like a setup row to get the clusters going. So you're going to go into the second stitch from the hook and repeat this pattern. Single crochet, chain 1, and skip 1 chain. That's it. So here we're going into that second stitch, single crochet, pulling up a loop, pulling it through the 2 loops on your hook, and then chain 1 and skip over a stitch before you start again. So this is going to make little holes that we can eventually fit our clusters into. So I've skipped a stitch, going in to make another single crochet through this chain. So pulling up a loop, pulling it through those 2 loops, and then chaining 1 to continue the pattern along the row. So again, that is single crochet into a stitch by pulling up 1 loop and then pulling it through the 2 loops on your hook, chaining 1 and skipping over the next stitch to start it again, and that will create your foundation here for the cluster stitch. On your very last single crochet of the row, leave these 2 loops on your hook, cut your yarn, and it's time to switch to the next color that you would like to use. This is color 2, which will be the color of your clusters. So pull that through the last 2 loops on your hook to finish that single crochet, then chain 2 and turn your work to start your first cluster row. To make these clusters, you're going to double crochet 3 together in the chain spaces across this row. So find the space between the 2 single crochets from the first row. You're going to yarn over, insert your hook into that chain space, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2 loops, yarn over, insert back in, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, again, yarn over, insert into that same chain space, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull under 2 loops, and then finally yarn over and pull through all of the loops on your hook, and you'll see that you have formed a cluster. Do a chain 1 just to keep it all nice and together. Skip over the next single crochet and find the next chain space. We're going to do the same cluster thing again. So let me show you one more time, because it's a lot of just like picking loops up in different orders. So you're going to yarn over, insert into that chain space, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull under 2 loops, yarn over through the same chain space, pull up, yarn over through 2 loops, yarn over into the same chain space, pull up, pull it under 2 loops, and then finally yarn over and pull it under 4 loops, and top it off with a chain 1. Continue making these clusters across the entire row, chaining 1 and skipping over a single crochet in between each one to keep them nice and separate. By the end, you should have made 11 clusters, and then in the very last stitch, you're going to do a basic double crochet. To do this, yarn over, insert your hook into the final single crochet of the last row, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull under 2 loops, and then here we have 2 loops left, and instead of pulling through that, we want to change colors again. So to finish off the double crochet, grab your color 1 and use that to pull through the final 2 loops, then chain 1 and turn around to make your next row. This is going to be a row that separates your cluster stitches with some single crochets. Start off with a basic single crochet into the first stitch, just pulling up a loop, yarning over and pulling it through 2 loops, then chain 1 and skip over the entire first cluster and make another single crochet in between the 2 clusters. This is the part I find so satisfying. So between each cluster, you're just chaining 1 and then making a single crochet in between the next 2 clusters. So chain 1 and then single crochet between the next 2 clusters. So you're pulling up a loop, yarning over and pulling it through the 2 loops on your hook. This is going to make a really nice way to separate all the clusters and make some good contrast between your colors. When you get to the very end of the row, you're going to do another basic single crochet into that last stitch, but again, we want to switch colors before going to the next row. So when you have 2 loops left on your hook, grab your scissors and cut that yarn to bring in your other color of yarn that you're using for your clusters to pull through those 2 loops and finish things off. Then chain 2 and we're off to another cluster stitch row. This time around it'll be a bit easier to see where to place your clusters because the chain spaces are right below the clusters from the last row. So you're going to do your double crochet 3 together in that chain space, and basically what you're doing is like half making a few double crochets and then at the very end finishing them all at the same time, and that's what gets it to cluster all together, which I think is a super cool effect. Another cluster stitch row down, 11 clusters done, time to finish it off with a double crochet. So that's going to be into the top of the last stitch of the row. Again, changing colors. Don't worry about all these ends that you're leaving. I will explain what to do with them later, but yes, we are changing colors every single row. Chain 1 here and turn things around. We're going to do another single stitch row. Single stitch into the first stitch and then chain 1, skip over the cluster, and do the same thing as before, single crocheting into the space between each cluster. This is the pattern for the entire scarf, guys, so have fun. Now you just do this like over and over again. You're going to alternate between these row 1 instructions and row 2 instructions for about 70 times total to make 70 cluster stitch rows, or as long as you want. You know, some people want a longer or shorter scarf, do your thing, but it's just the same thing over and over. You can screenshot this here and continue going with the cluster stitch. When you do that many rows, you will also end up with literally hundreds of ends, and don't worry, I'm about to show you a plan. I'm not going to make you weave in each one of those. You can see I've already finished off the left hand side with some trim. That's what we're going to do on the right side now. So I'm starting by just kind of like smoothing out all the ends, making sure that things are tight on each row the way that I want them to, and then having everything stick out so I know where it is. And I'm going to cut down those ends to about like pinky length, just because if they're too long you can't tuck them all away. So I'm making them all an even length, and they're pretty short but still long enough that it's not going to just kind of like shrivel back into the piece. Then you can see here that you can kind of just lay them down, and we're going to crochet a trim around all of these ends. I've decided to use a different color. You can use one of the colors that you've already had. I honestly just chose the third color because I ran out of my other colors. So this is just going to be a basic single crochet trim around the entire scarf, and we're going to use it to encase all of those ends. So you can see I'm pulling up loops and just making basic single crochet stitches, but as I go, smoothing down all of the ends and kind of like twisting them together and just making sure that I make this single crochet totally around it. It's actually a really satisfying process and really effective. To make everything nice and even, make sure to do 2 single crochets in each cluster stitch row and 1 single crochet in each single stitch row, and that'll make sure that you just have a nice even border. Again, you can see kind of some more angles here as I get more ends together, how it's all being encased into the single crochet trim. It's kind of like a thick like tube or channel, so you can see here I've made my single crochet trim, but all of this stuff is just kind of like coming out of the inside of it. I was not sure that this was going to work as well as it did. I thought I was just kind of like trying to dream up something so that I didn't have to deal with all these ends, but honestly I'm going to be using this method more often because it felt like quite secure. You can see what it looks like on the front and the back. On the back there were a few more ends kind of sticking out, but because they're already encased and closed and secure in the trim, you can just grab some scissors and cut those off to make it look nice and sleek. As I got to the edge here, I didn't really do anything different. I just made sure to do a single crochet into the edge and kind of wrap the ends around the corner so that they would continue to be encased along that short edge as well. Same thing, just encasing those ends in the single crochet trim until they run out, and then I finished the whole thing with a slip stitch so that it was seamless around the whole thing and there was no break in the border. That yarn, pull it up through that loop, and everything's all finished off, and you only have a few of those border ends that you have to weave in. You're welcome. So I grabbed my tapestry needle, inserted the yarn into that, and just pulled it through the back side a few times until like I felt like it was secure and I could cut it off, and it looked like everything was nice and neat and clean. I also went down each border and made sure to cut off any just little bits of those ends that were sticking out. And that's it. The scarf is finished. I love how this turned out. I think there are so many cool combinations of colors that could be had here, so I definitely need to start dreaming up my next one. While you're here, take a scroll through the videos that we've got going. Make sure you're subscribed because we have a bunch of free knitting, crochet, and sewing patterns out. Tag Material Girls in your finished makes. I can't wait to see them and hope you have a great day.